Joining me now to discuss the fallout from the Rangers series with the Devils is Nick Faria of AMNY.com. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Great to hear from you, Carolyn. Great to be on again.
Well, thanks for coming on so quickly. I mean, I think we both thought that the Rangers playoffs would last a little bit longer than this. And you called it before this series began, which was the last time that we spoke, and said that if the Rangers can't get out of this thing, there was going to be consequence. And now we know what that is. Is the firing of Gerard Gallant justifiable in your opinion?
It really comes down to a couple different factors here, Carolyn. First off, and I think the most important piece is the players. Gerard Gallant coming into the Rangers was a player's coach, a lot different than the coaches they've had in the past. And the reason why they brought him in was because they felt he could communicate well with his organization, make sure the players were ready and able to produce at a very high level. During the regular season, they did that. Back-to-back 100-point seasons, all of that very well and good. But once they got to the Eastern Conference Finals, expectations shifted, and he didn't really have that same communication with his players. And there's a reason why throughout his career he's only lasted 2-3 years with Vegas, specifically when you look at it. But during exit interviews with the players, I think it was very apparent, talking to Jacob Trouba, talking to Barclay Goodrow, Capo Caco, a lot of them enjoyed Gerard Gallant, but none of them really gave a glowing endorsement of this is the guy we want as our head coach, which could have tilted a lot of different things in Gallant's favor. So I think a little bit is the fact that the players' exit interviews with Chris Drury played a part in it. And I'm not saying that they are the reason, Gerard Gallant's been fired, because if you have a 2-0 series lead in back-to-back series, both in the Eastern Conference Finals and against New Jersey, and then you come out and get outplayed for a majority of those two series and get eliminated both times, where's the adjustments? Where's the communication from the coach? What adjustments were placed? Gerard Gallant may have thought adjustments were made. It certainly didn't seem that way. And those two reasons, the player exit interviews stepping in and saying clearly that a new voice was needed in the locker room, and also the results on the ice, both played a part, I think, in Gallant not being the head coach of the Rangers anymore.
So the sense you got from the players' interviews is that Gallant was a better regular season coach, that there was some kind of communication breakdown where the message wasn't being delivered in a way that the players needed to hear it. Where do you think he fell short?
I really think it comes down to the adjustments. I really do, because and again, this is going based off of conversations I've had, with other beat reporters and trying to gauge exactly where the players fell in line here. But a big example really is Artemi Panarin. He didn't really produce much of anything in this first round series against the New Jersey Devils. I wasn't able to really speak with him during exit interviews, but Jacob Trouba, a lot of that leadership group that Gallant had touted on and said that this is the reason why we're going to win and get through hard times, they spoke nicely of the head coach, but that doesn't really go so far as to say we want him to be our guy in the next couple of years. And the fact that Artemi Panarin now for 2 straight postseasons has not been able to produce, and he is one of your highest paid players, someone's got to respond to that. Someone's got to answer for that. You're not going to be able to trade Panarin because, he has such a massive cap hit. He is such a great player in the regular season. He is such a force moving the puck offensively. So it really comes down to, who is the guy that's going to get the most blame? And we can argue if the players needed to produce more, if the coaching staff needed to adjust more. But for the last 2 playoff runs, Igor Shesterkin, the goaltender, has been terrific. And outside of him, it really hasn't been much consistency from the offensive end. And it really has just been plug and play. They get a goal on the power play, they get some momentum, and they run that to a series win. That didn't happen this round.
So based on your expertise, following the team, following the sport, that is kind of where my mind was heading next, is where is the breakdown of responsibility when it comes to postseason performance? If it is about the lack of adjustments and not having anything, in your pockets when you need to dig deep and make something happen on the power play or otherwise, is it more coaching in your opinion? I mean, how much responsibility do the players bear in not skating up to snuff against a way less experienced team?
There was an old saying that I found in high school with my high school coach, where coaches get way too much of the credit and way too much of the blame. And that could really spell true for Gerard Gallant's tenure here, because when he was hired Everyone understood that this was a player's coach, gallivant the locker room, make sure everyone was together as one unit. And the X's and O's, which he never has been very strong with, will come with time, will come with the players getting, a lot better and overwhelming opponents with their overall talent. That happened at some points, but eventually when you get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, you got to be able to coach. And the one thing the Rangers didn't do well is they did not adjust to Akira Schmid at all throughout the series. They had a really good game in Game 6. A lot of that could have been puck luck, as Lindy Ruff had said after the game. He wasn't really too worried about it, and it showed to be true in Game 7 when the Devils just overwhelmed the Rangers in every facet. X's and O's mean something in the playoffs because that's the one way. Listen, everyone in this series is talented. Everyone in the playoffs is talented. Everyone has an edge as a reason of why they got here. So you have to have something as a coach that's going to be that next extra boost for your team. And Gallant never had it, was never going to have it. He wasn't hired to have it. But eventually, when push comes to shove, and the reason you're losing is because there's a lack of adjustments, the players aren't fully responding. They seemed lifeless in the last 2 games against New Jersey. I believe they lost, a grand total of 9-1 total, and from games 5 and 7. I mean, that's just it's not sustainable for a head coach to be able to survive with all the talent that they had, just because he's a nice guy and had command of the locker room later in the year.
It makes you wonder what the thought process was in his hiring in the first place, if what they needed was a guy who's savvy with X's and O's when it matters the most. Is there a coach out there that's available that does have that ability? What should they do now?
Well, and this is where the difficult side is. A lot of people speculated that Joel Quenneville was going to be the favorite for the job. That no longer is a thought, particularly after Larry Brooks of the New York Post gave his remarks. It doesn't seem that that's going to be an option. A lot of people, and this is the problem. A lot of coaches now in hockey, especially the experienced ones that have won cups before, a lot of them are very similar to Gerard Gallant. Players, coaches, the message gets stale after a while, and they need to change of scenery. I don't know if Chris Drury is going to be able to survive another, year where he hires a really nice guy, the players love him, they don't have an X's and O's guy, and they lose in the second or first round because they can't get over the hump. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I know Knobloch, the AHL coach for Hartford, he's very well liked within the organization. And remember, the Rangers are still a very young team. His work with the AHL Wolfpack and that experience with those young guys, they're going on a great run right now in the Calder Cup playoffs. I have to think that he has to be in consideration. I love the guy, Burnett. I know he has a DUI scandal earlier this year with New Jersey, but I'm sure they're going to try to kick the tires on him. There's a lot of veteran guys, like I said. This is really going to be the most important decision that Chris Drury makes. Not a lot of GMs are able to fire 3 different head coaches and still live to tell the tale and continue to build the team in his image. I don't know if that's going to be the case. There's a lot of talent on this Rangers roster. There's going to be repercussions if they don't get this hire right.
Is it fair to say that at this point for Drury, hiring another coach who is a player's guy, who is basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, a coach that they've already had, a type of coach they already had, is that going to be enough? I mean, do you see them rolling the dice and taking a risk on a guy who's in the AHL, who doesn't have a lot of, traditional professional experience? Is it going to have to get risky for Drury to make something happen that is unlike the status quo, what Rangers fans have seen so far?
This is going to be a very interesting decision, Carolyn, and that's where I kind of draw. Listen, Knobloch, great mind, really good guy, can develop young talent, and the Rangers need someone to develop young talent. Gallant didn't really do it. David Quinn didn't really do it. But ultimately, you're absolutely right. The fan base, with the talent they have and the playoff experience that they have built over the last couple of years, they need a guy that has experience in these matters. And this is the line that Drury is going to have to cross. Do I go with an inexperienced guy and let the team grow with him while still being relatively young and growing and being able to develop our parts to build a cohesive unit for playoff time? Or do I just say, let's just go with the veteran, Go with what has worked in the past. Different names. Claude Julien, I believe, could definitely be an option. I'm not saying that he's going to be the favorite, but you have different guys here that can be able to jump in and as veteran coaches and be able to successfully lead this team into the postseason. What happens in the postseason, though, is a lot of a crapshoot. If you don't make the specific adjustments going into a series, you could lose it. If you make the adjustments and the other coach makes an adjustment, and if you don't have adjustments to those adjustments, all that goes to hell in a handbasket anyway, and it doesn't really matter. You're still looking for answers at the end of it. So this is a very complex process, and Drury said as much. He is going to take his time with this hiring because there's a lot of names that are going to be available. There's a lot of names that are going to have their full-on, resume touted with an original 6 roster. And there's one name that I brought up. It's not going to be very likely, but Barry Trotz, just hired with Nashville as the GM. It's extremely, extremely unlikely that he were to take a job, outside of his hometown, where his house is, where his family is. I don't think he's going to leave that cushion job for an original 6 franchise. However, before he was hired with Nashville, he said the only other head coaching job that I would consider would be an original 6 franchise. Not saying it's going to happen, but if you're Chris Drury, you got to make a call. Even just to say, hey, are you interested in a head coaching job? Trotz says no, then you move on. But to me, if you're not going after Quenneville, the winningest coach that isn't coaching right now, who has won a Stanley Cup and has shown the ability to get the most out of, I don't want to say mediocre talent, but average talent with what the Islanders had, was Barry Trotz. Kick the tires, man. Let's get this going. But again, it's very unlikely, but that's a name that I look at and say, Drury, he's not going to leave any stone unturned. Just give a call, ask to see what's possible.
And Drury's future, in your mind, is dependent on this process and this choice. It is absolute, cannot screw this up again.
Well, and the thing is, with Drury, he's had a lot of success, the last couple of years building this roster. The trade deadlines have gone very, very well for him. 2 years ago it was Andrew Kopp and Frank Vetrano. This past year it was Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. The Kane trade didn't really gel well with the overall roster because that's just how the player he was. He's more of a passer, and when you pair him with a passer like Artemi Panarin, no one's going to want to shoot the puck, which caused a lot of problems on the ice later in the year, and it needed to have that little time to adjust. So with a guy like Drury, and for a general manager, you look at the process of draft picks, the process of trades. Is the future health of the organization still intact? And the answer to all three is yes. And he has done a very good job of making sure the current Rangers are good enough to compete for a title, but the future Rangers aren't lost at the wayside during that same time. They still have a first-round pick in this upcoming NHL draft, which is considered to be a very deep draft class. That being said, part of the GM process when you are the face of an organization is getting the right head coach hired. And to a point, and I kind of compare this to what the Golden State Warriors did with Mark Jackson. They had gotten to the second round with Jackson as the head coach. They weren't really getting much further, and Golden State pulled the plug on him and brought in Steve Kerr. Just because you fire a veteran coach who had experience, who had the command of the locker room, doesn't mean he's the right guy for the long-term future. And for the Warriors, they brought in Steve Kerr, and they've been the most successful NBA franchise over the last decade. The same could be said for Drury if he gets this hire right. The big point, though, is if you can't get that hire, Dolan's going to be sitting there going, listen, man, you're great as part of the trade deadline. The draft has gone really well. We're developing prospects. You can't get the head coaching job right, and we're not winning because of it. We're going to need to go in a different direction. I'm not saying that's going to happen immediately, because you're going to need to have a coach bring in his system, and it's going to take a couple months, maybe even more than a year. But the time is now ticking on Chris Drury's tenure with the Rangers, because if he doesn't get this right, this is now the third coach he's going to have to move.
It's a savage process. What have you done for me lately? And winning is what matters. How much time realistically does he have to be thorough about this and make this choice?
He's going to take his time. And for any coach, for any general manager looking for a head coach, you want a general manager that is going to be patient, who is going to go through, like I said, leave no stone unturned, continue through the process. I believe Gallant was hired late June, early July when he was hired a couple of years ago. I would think that's a similar process to what the Rangers want to do, this time around. I don't see, especially with the large group of veteran coaches available, I don't see him just picking a guy and saying, you're it, let's move forward in a couple weeks, and that's it. I think he's going to take his time. He understands the importance that this hiring is going to be. He understands the frustration with the fan base right now. 2 straight playoff exits where the coaching staff didn't really do enough to help his team win in the long run. I would say this. If you're a Rangers fan looking for the big hire, whether it's a top head coach that's available right now, or just hiring and promoting coaches from the AHL side, that's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. If you're a well-run organization, take your time, be deliberate with the process, and that for everything that I've heard is what Chris Drury is going to do.
Take us through, Nick, some of the team's restricted free agents and what you see for Miller, Lafreniere, some of these guys.
So really, the big question to me isn't going to be about them. It's going to be which veteran is moved. They have about $12 million in cap space. It's not a lot to lock up, a lot of these young guys for long-term deals, and they're going to do so. You're not going to draft Alexis Lafreniere and not give him a second contract, even at the age, 21, 22 years old. To get rid of him early on or let him walk would be gross incompetence from an organizational restructure. That's just not going to happen with the Rangers. I'd be stunned if that was the case. But Barclay Goodrow is making over $3 million. There's talk of Ryan Lindgren as well, even though he's been a great locker room presence. I think Goodrow is the big guy. If they try to move Goodrow in the offseason, that is telling me they are trying to get Miller down long-term. They're trying to get Laffy done long-term, and also see what they do in free agency and make sure they have enough firepower to say, hey, if we want to extend Vladimir Tarasenko, if we want to extend Patrick Kane and give him some more time if he's truly healthy, that could be done. Saving $3 million in the cap, that's going to be around $15 million. Let's say Miller goes for $4 million. Lafreniere goes for the similar contract that Kakko got last season, which was, I believe, around like $3 million. You're looking at a team that is going to have roughly around $10 million in cap space for a particular player. Maybe, Vladimir Tarasenko was really, really good for the Rangers, both in the series against the Devils and when he was traded to them back in February. If you're going to choose between Tarasenko and Kane, Tarasenko is the obvious choice. And it makes a lot of sense for the Rangers to say, let's save as much money as we can to keep one of these guys in-house, because both of them seemed open to the possibility in exit interviews.
And you think Tarasenko is the guy who has done enough?
Yeah. It's all about fit. It really is all about fit. And, Kaapo Kakko is going to get a lot more playing time next year after, his career year. He had a very, very good season. Philip Hedl is going to get more playing time. He had a terrific season. A 4-year deal came along with it. In terms of fit, though, where does Patrick Kane fit on this roster? If you put him with Mika Zibanejad, you put him with Chris Kreider, you have the passer, but you don't really have the kind of score, that aggressive score that they need on that top line. If you put him on the second line, you pair him with Artemi Panarin. Yes, they had a great run in Chicago in that short time that they had, but they're 2 passing forwards now that don't like to shoot. And you can't have that as your second line. So Tarasenko, I believe, is more aggressive. He's a better overall scorer. I think he's the overall better fit for the Rangers from where they are now and where they need to be going into next season.
What do they need? What do they need to do going into next season? I mean, is Patrick Kane enough? And given their situation with the cap, where do you see them needing to make immediate change?
That's a great question. The fourth line, is pretty solid, especially now with Jimmy Vesey, locked in. They're going to have to make a decision on Tyler Mott. For all consideration that I've heard, they're going to try to keep him around. But again, this goes back to Barclay Goodrow. If they move Goodrow, you're going to need a fourth line center. Ryan Carpenter did not do the job last year. Didn't really play well. Lasted basically, like a month before they moved on from him and sent him down to the AHL. So if I look at it from that perspective, it comes down to what they end up doing for these top two guys. They lock up Miller, they lock up Laffey, and they move Gaudreau for Tarasenko to remain with the team. Then it's just about a fourth line center, and you roll with what you have. I think they need another winger. They could use another center depending. Their defense, though, is pretty much set. They're going to want to lock up Nico Mikkola, who's part of the Tarasenko deal. They're going to want another backup for Igor Shesterkin. But again, I say these things, and a lot of these things are all about depth. The core is intact, and the core should be good enough to get back to the postseason and compete for a championship. These last couple of moves, we're talking about guys on short deals, not costing a lot on the cap. Maybe they bring back Yaro Halak because he was really good later on in the season, but all these things can be in consideration. All these things can be talked about. Listen, let's bring in, player X for, $1 million vet minimum, have him try out for the fourth line and let him grow with these guys with VC and Mod if we can extend him to a long-term deal. With Braden Schneider as that final defensive pair, there's not really a major pressure to be like, we need to find this final guy on the defensive end. A lot of this is depth. A lot of this is just figuring out how we're going to fill out the rest of the roster. And if you get a guy like Tarasenko, that request for depth isn't going to be as important if you let him walk in free agency and you don't have a contingency plan in place.
I imagine that's probably part of the frustration for Rangers fans is exactly what you're saying. You're talking about adding an ancillary piece here, a little bit of depth here, but the core is still there. And you had all of these veterans who had, an incredible amount of experience who were primed to move on past this first round. What should the team take away from this playoff exit?
That's a great question. And I think the answer really came from Gallant during his last press conference with the Rangers. And he was basically saying after his tirade of he couldn't believe that he was, there were conversations of him being fired after back-to-back 100-point seasons. He understood that it was part of the business and part of the job of being in New York. But he also said, you look at Colorado, you look at Tampa Bay, you look at Washington, a lot of first, second round playoff exits. And then eventually that was part of the experience that got them to that point to get them over the hump and win a Stanley Cup championship. So, and Gallant's not wrong. A lot of different teams, a lot of great teams over the last few years have had a lot of playoff hurt before they got to that plateau. And I think that's part of the process. And they need a head coach. And this is kind of where I'm going back to it. The core is here, and the core is as good as any across the NHL. They've got scorers, you've got talented players, you've got passers. All of it is really, really solid. But that goes back to the head coach. You have all these guys, make it happen. Make these guys into the cohesive unit that is a championship-level hockey team. And Gallant couldn't do it this past year. They couldn't do it at the beginning of the year when they went 10-9-4, and there were talks about him being fired right then and there. And then they started getting hot later in the year, but then the trades come in, seemingly expecting to delve into and put them over the hump and make them the best hockey team that they could possibly be, and none of the pieces fit. And part of that is Gerard Gallant not saying, Patrick Kane can't work with Artemi Panarin. We have to move him to a specific line, whether that's with the kids and move Capo Caco up or moving Tarasenko with Panarin and letting that be the case. They couldn't do that. And that was a major, major problem throughout the playoff series against New Jersey. And it really sort of bit them, and that's why they were eliminated in the first round. They need a coach that is able to not just communicate well with the players, but be able to adjust in-game, out of game, and be able to communicate those adjustments in a way that has the team buying it.
Seems like in this instance, the way you're describing it, the blame was maybe placed in the right spot. If you've got all these talented guys that needed a little bit more direction on the ice, do you see Gallant finding another home quickly in the league?
Absolutely. You don't have a coach that wins 100 points. Again, like I said it 3 times, I've 100 points back-to-back seasons. The success that he had in Vegas, he's had success everywhere he goes, but he also has quick exits. And part of those quick exits is he doesn't get along well with, certain general managers. They start, riffing and I want to do it my way. And the general manager wants to do it his way. And the playoff results of not reaching the playoffs or not getting as far in the playoffs as they should comes back to bite him. And I think he's easily going to get another head coaching job. He's very well liked in locker rooms, very well respected in other locker rooms. It's just a matter of it's not going to be here, and it can't be here if the Rangers are going to get to that next step.
And that arc that he was describing about maybe needing some playoff adversity to reach your ultimate goal of winning a cup, is there any chance, in your opinion, kind of in your gut feeling, that the Rangers might regret letting him go this soon after back-to-back 100-point seasons?
There's always that regret. And quite frankly, this is the big storyline that's going to be with the team next year, because they had a lot of regular season success. They couldn't get deep into the playoffs back-to-back years. And if a coach can't get there, his future is going to be on the line. Chris Drury's future is going to be on the line. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to have to answer for this, because the letter comes in, 2018, 2019, starting to rebuild. They had gotten the rebuild to a specific point, and then they went all in when they signed Artemi Panarin. And that was essentially the end of the rebuild. We're going to be competing right now. Whether that was right, wrong, indifferent, doesn't matter anymore. Now it's the players are ready, the players are experienced, and they need a coach to be able to win and win right now. Playoff seeding doesn't always matter in the Stanley Cup playoffs, as we learned this year with Boston and Colorado, Florida right now in the driver's seat. But when you look at it from the perspective of regretting a potential firing of a coach that was highly successful, it absolutely can happen. But the reward of getting further than they've ever had in over a decade is a lot bigger than the risk that comes with that.
Nick Faria, great stuff as always. I hope to circle back with you once they decide who
Absolutely.
that guy is going to be. Before I let you go, any other offseason storylines that I've missed that you're paying attention to that Rangers fans are definitely paying attention to?
I really think everyone's got the pulse on the beat right now. It's all about the head coaching job. And then once that coach, gets hired, brings in his own staff, then the question is going to come down to who are they going to keep in free agency? Are they going to move Barclay Goodrow? Are they going to move a veteran and be able to get more cap space to keep Vladimir Tarasenko, to be able to lock up Keandre Miller and Alexis Lafreniere long term? That's going to be the chief storyline, because again, the core is here. The core is locked in for at least another few years for them to be able to develop and go for a championship. It's all about now finding those last little bits and pieces around the roster to fill out everything, but also finding the right guy that's going to be able to take them to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Nick Faria, great stuff. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks for having me on, Carolyn. Great talking to you.